The parachute assassin. Every year, thousands of people cross an item off their bucket list by leaping out of an aeroplane above Nether Avon Airfield's broad, flat, grass plain. It's the largest parachute drop zone in the United Kingdom, but unremarkable to look at. Military land, little more than 2 blue and white Cessnas waiting to take off, a few billowing orange windsocks, and some picnic tables. There's an enormous khaki hangar with a corrugated iron roof. This is where the kit room is, where the toilets are, and where Emile Cilliers tried to get away with murdering his wife. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor, and in this video I'm going to tell you the story about Emile Cilliers. In other words, a man known as the parachute assassin who sought to kill his wife, although his assassination attempt failed. It's also to tell you what Cilliers is, so that you can understand more about his behaviours and, utilising a real-life example, understand more about the personality type. And if you happen to be familiar with the case, and you may have wondered what he is, well, this will help you understand. On Saturday, the 4th of April 2015, he took Victoria Cilliers' parachute rig into the toilets and sabotaged it. The fact that he sought to kill his wife suggests that either he had no emotional empathy for her, or something had happened which had caused his emotional empathy for her to be reduced to such a degree that it was within the realms of murderous intent. The next day, Easter Sunday, Vicky leapt from one of the Cessnas and fell like a rag doll underneath her flailing canopy. She fell 4,000 feet, 1,200 metres to the ground, at 60 miles per hour, to what should have been her death. The first people on the scene were so sure of it that they brought a body bag. But she was found alive, with a broken spine, fractured ribs and a shattered pelvis, surviving only because her small frame had landed in a soft, newly ploughed field. It was Cilliers' second attempt to kill Vicky in less than a week. Again, the fact that he tried twice to kill his wife would suggest an absence of emotional empathy for her, or that there was some form of external stressor that was being maintained that had not only reduced his emotional empathy for her, but had reduced it to such an extent that he saw murdering her as appropriate. It took 2 criminal trials to prove it, and even after Cilliers was found guilty of 2 counts of attempted murder in May, and given a life sentence with minimum term of 18 years in the June, the victim herself says she refuses to believe her husband tried to kill her. When someone survives an attempt on their life, it should be a huge advantage for the police investigation. But Vicky Cilliers' survival made it difficult to prosecute. Emile Cilliers was convicted in spite of her evidence, rather than because of it. Why did a 38-year-old army officer want to kill his wife, the mother of his toddler and newborn baby? Why do it in such a far-fetched, complicated way? And how close did he come to getting away with it? Now, there are many reasons why people kill. Some do it because they have no emotional empathy, and they decide that somebody is in their way and they need to remove them. Many individuals kill as a consequence of losing their heads in a moment. In some instances, it's a narcissist who has experienced ignited fury and has lashed out. They want to harm the individual, may even want to kill them, and end up doing so. In some instances, the individual kills in self-defense. in others as a consequence of state-sponsored approval, for instance a soldier. In other instances, and it's much rarer, some individuals plan the death of another person and take steps to bring it into occurrence. Mark Bayada is fed up with answering questions. The chief instructor and boss of the Army Parachute Association, which runs Nether Avon, Bayada, has spent 3 years being questioned about that Easter weekend. First by the police, then during cross-examination by defence barristers in 2 successive trials. The first collapsed when 2 members of the jury had to be dismissed with stress-related illness. He cares about getting things right, down to the last detail. That's what makes him good at his job. But he has been ground down by being interrogated for days on end. Still, if it weren't for him, the attempted murder of Emile Cilliers would never have been considered a crime at all. It was his decision to call the police, at a time when everyone else assumed she had been injured in a freak parachuting accident. Now it would appear that Emile Cilliers sought to murder his wife and make it look like an accident, which shows on his part that there was planning, that he had thought about doing this, that this was not a rash response, a heated reaction as a consequence of a loss of control through drunkenness or a loss of control through ignited fury, but rather a cold, calculated decision to bring his wife's life to an end and to make it seem like it was an accident. Bayada says, "I'm the fun police," in a deadpan tone. "It's my job to protect people from themselves." Parachuting has been Bayada's life since his first jump in 1992. He is ex-military and luxed, with a greying Grade 1 haircut and beard and faded tattoos peeking out of the sleeves of his T-shirt. He has the tanned skin of someone who is happiest outside. The hangar is a vast space filled with soldiers learning to land on blue crash mats. On weekends and certain afternoons, it's open to the public and anyone can jump here. There is the kit room, where more than 100 parachute rigs hang on neat metal racks ready to go, organised according to the weight and level of experience of the jumper who might use them. Then he points out the dreaded toilet where Cilliers disappeared with Vicky's rig and the dreaded locker where he stashed it overnight. Vicky Cilliers was a Nether Avon regular, an accelerated freefall AFF instructor with 2,654 jumps to her name. She was trained to deal with out-of-control, inexperienced jumpers and was able to chase them around the sky during freefall, catch them and get them in the right position in midair. A real hardcore skill, Bayada says solemnly. This demonstrates that what happened to her could not have been an accident given the level of skill that she had. She worked as a physiotherapist for the Ministry of Defence and met Cilliers, an instructor in the Royal Army Physical Training Corps, originally from South Africa, when she treated him for a skiing injury. By April 2015, they'd been married for 4 years and lived in Amesbury, a 10-minute drive from the airfield, with their 3-year-old daughter and 5-week-old son. Bayada says he knew both of them, but only in a professional capacity. Having sat through both trials, he now knows far too much about their personal lives. It was Cilliers who had arranged Vicky's jump that weekend, her first for nearly a year, telling her it was a treat after having their baby. Thus, on the face of it, it appears like a kind act, an inducement to get her to jump. He brought both their newborn and their 3-year-old along to watch their mother jump. The fact that he brought his children to what would be an attempted murder scene is also demonstrative of an absence of emotional empathy or severely dialed down emotional empathy. He offered to collect a parachute from the kit store and then disappeared into the toilet with it, claiming later that he only did so because his daughter needed the loo and he didn't want to leave Vicky's rig unattended. That was a lie. As Bayada points out, everyone leaves their kit out in the hangar. It would be absurd to take a 3-year-old into the tiny toilet cubicle with a cumbersome parachute on your back. Once it was decided that the weather was too bad for anyone to jump on the Saturday, Cilliers did not return the rig to the kit store like everyone else. He stashed it in Vicky's locker. The weather was still poor on Easter Sunday, and by the afternoon Vicky and the 11 others due to jump with her were getting restless. At 4 p.m. they decided to do a hop and pop, a low-altitude jump where they would open their parachutes within seconds of getting out of the plane at 4,000 feet, as the cloud cover was too low to go any higher. Vicky was excited to be back in the sky, fist-bumping the others inside the plane. She was the last of the 12 to make the jump. Almost as soon as Bayada reached her on the ground, he noticed strange things about her kit. All the lines on one side of the parachute were knotted up, he says. When we lifted her onto the stretcher to put her into the helicopter, one of the paramedics asked if someone could look underneath to make sure no lines were still attached. That's the first time I looked at the equipment properly, and I could see the two ends of the risers on the reserve parachute were unattached. Bayer didn't know it then, but Cilliers had knotted Vicky's main canopy and removed vital parts of the reserve. The soft links or slinks that connect the harness to the parachute were absent. This was a premeditated act. Bayada goes through everything he looked for in the kit Vicky left behind. He had tried to find loose stitching in the harness or canopy, bunching on the straps to show that they'd been under any pressure, residues, burn marks, anything to suggest the slinks had been there and somehow come away. But he could find nothing to show a mechanical fault. And although Vicky's reserve parachute had never before been deployed, it had been inspected 16 times by 10 different advanced packers over its lifetime, most recently 2 months before Easter Sunday, and each time the slinks were there. None of it added up, he says. Finding out what had gone wrong became a moral issue for Bayada. He points to a rack in his office. That set of kit, the grey one's mine. The one next to it's my son's. My whole life is this. If something has gone drastically wrong and the kit's to blame, then it affects all my friends, not just me professionally. Phoning the police was not something I took lightly, but I absolutely wanted to know. Parachuting accidents happen, but they are surprisingly rare. The British Parachute Association, BPA, the sport's national governing body, estimates there were 2.3 million sport jumps in the 10 years before Easter 2015. Of those, there were 2,900 cases where the reserve parachute had to be deployed, and not a single incident where there was also a problem with the reserve. According to the BPA, the only known instance of both the main and reserve failing to operate was in the case of Stephen Hilda. Hilda, a 20-year-old officer cadet, fell 13,000 feet to his death on the 4th of July 2003 in Hibelstow in Lincolnshire. Someone had cut the risers on his reserve, and the police initially launched a murder inquiry before concluding 10 months later that his death was probably a suicide. No DNA other than his own was found on his kit, and the scissors used to cut the risers was found in the boot of his car. It's a story that every serious skydiver knows, and one Cilliers alluded to during his trial. He suggested his wife might have tried to kill herself. Blame shifting. The coroner in Hilda's case returned an open verdict, and many in the skydiving community have long rejected the idea that Hilda had intended to kill himself. It is widely believed that he was murdered. There have been a number of suicides over the years parachuting, says Jeff Montgomery, the BPA safety and technical officer. But Stephen Hilda did everything to try and save his life. He went to operate the main, but nothing happened, and then he operated his reserve. If you want to kill yourself, you don't try to save your life. The skydiving community is small. Both Montgomery and Bayada knew the Cilliers for years, but none of the experienced skydivers seem to have known them particularly well. Montgomery is a regular jumper at Nether Avon and has been on exercises abroad with Vicky. She was dating Emile, and when they married, I'd had some sort of dealings with him. Hi, how are you doing? All that kind of stuff. He kept himself to himself, I don't remember thinking anything particularly unusual about him. Of course, individuals that kill and have done so through premeditation are not individuals that go running around wielding axes, talking about the fact that they want to kill somebody. They pass for normal. They pass for everyday individuals. They have an ability to fit in. DC Maddie Henner of the police said 2.4 children, nuclear family. They looked totally normal from the outside anyway. DI Paul Franklin, Henner and their colleague DS Mark Lewis work at Melksham Police Divisional HQ on an industrial estate surrounded by fields. It's a week after Cilliers has been found guilty, and they are visibly relieved to have cracked a once-in-a-career case. But it didn't feel like a criminal case at first. After Bayada's call, Franklin sent an officer to the hospital to ask Vicky questions while the BPA took a second look at her parachute, but they didn't expect much. We thought they'd come back with some mechanical reason. Very sad, very sorry, but nothing wrong here. Bumbled along for a couple of days. Then they got a call from one of Vicky's friends. They said something wasn't right, that the relationship between Victoria and Emile was quite toxic. It was a couple of weeks before I was actually get a statement, but once we did, things took a very different turn. The friend said Vicky was locked in a coercive relationship with Cilliers. Abuse, lack of emotional empathy, necessity of the assertion of control. There were domestic abuse issues within the relationship that were not obvious from the outside. Franklin explains, we're not talking about black eyes and bruises. We're talking about unseen stuff. The abuse followed a typical pattern, Henner explains. You treat somebody like a princess, idealization, bringing them under control. And then you do something really unacceptable and underhand, devaluing behavior, assertion of control. But when you get found out, you treat them like a princess again. Possible institution of a respite period. The woman keeps thinking, he's treated me really well, I'll let him off with that one, emotional thinking, and then it happens again. It becomes that she's so squashed by it that she just accepts that that's what life is. Accordingly, the domestic life of the Cilliers pointed to an abusive, toxic relationship, which invariably, where it has been taking place over a sustained period of time, supports the narcissistic or psychopathic dynamic. Then the BPA confirmed Bayada's findings, that there was no mechanical reason for the failure of Victoria's parachute. At the same time, there were no fingerprints or DNA on the parachute linking it to Cilliers, and allegations of a toxic relationship are not enough to convict a man of attempted murder. The investigation hinged on what Franklin calls old-fashioned detective work, to establish that Cilliers, who appeared every inch the responsible army man, external facade, had the motivation and disposition to do something this preposterous. On the 28th of April 2015, Henner went to arrest Cilliers in his barracks in Aldershot. He had a glass-sided office that looked out over the gym where he worked as a physical training instructor, and Henner was with Military Special Branch when she searched it and took him into custody. When she told him she was arresting him on suspicion of attempted murder, he made no objection. The fact that he made no objection shows that there is an ability to either assert considerable control in relation to what would be a threat to control, or that he is an individual unaffected by heated fury, and his desire for control comes from a different place. No denial was issued. He didn't object, he went along with it. In fact, he did not react at all. This lack of reaction would either point to somebody that in effect exhibits an absence of anxiety or fearlessness, or somebody who has a very high level of control over ignited fury. He also didn't want a solicitor. Henna interrogated him for 6 hours that evening. He was very, very self-assured, she says. The fact that he was able to endure a 6-hour interrogation without loss of temper, without lashing out, by remaining self-assured, either shows an individual with a very high control threshold over ignited fury, which would point to a greater narcissist, or that he doesn't experience the anxiety and that he is able to maintain a calm exterior, which would point to the control abilities of a psychopath. He revealed that he was having an affair with Stephanie Goller, an Austrian skydiving instructor he'd met on Tinder while abroad on an army skiing trip. Conducting an affair, absence of emotional empathy, sense of entitlement, use of Tinder, hunting ground. He admitted he was in debt to payday loan companies. That shows a haphazardness, and also a potential lack of accountability to get into such a level of debt, particularly because they're payday loan companies rather than, say, an established bank. He also volunteered the fact that he had disappeared to the toilets for a while on the Saturday afternoon. He offered up both a motive and a means of murder as if he were untouchable. This is demonstrative of a dismissive attitude, a haughty arrogance, a concept of invincibility, that he couldn't be touched. That even though he was being investigated and interrogated by a policeman, he remained entirely calm, that almost he saw it as a game. He was very clever. He covered all the points he knew we were going to discover from looking at his phone. He assumed we were going to accept what he was saying and that he would never see us again. Arrogance, supreme confidence, concept of invulnerability. It had been a grueling day, particularly for someone who should be worrying about his seriously injured wife. At the end of the interview, Henna asked him if he had anything to say. He said, "The worst part about today was that you arrested me in front of my subordinates." Notice that he doesn't express any concern in relation to his wife, showing that he has no emotional empathy for her, that he's not concerned about the fact of being arrested, but it's that he was arrested in front of his subordinates, which shows that he is concerned about his status being affected, which links to the issue of control. Henna stated, "At that point, I remember thinking, this man is odd." Franklin explained, "The better I got to know him, the more that kind of response made sense with the type of personality. He only cares about himself." In the circumstances, the fact that he only cares about himself demonstrates an absence of emotional empathy for anybody else, that he is driven to pursue his own needs, which might be the prime aims with regard to a narcissist or the necessary triad for a psychopath. The police stated he's like a politician. You'd ask a question and he wouldn't give you a direct answer. Nullification of threat to control. He'd lead off somewhere else that you think sounded really interesting. They made a concerted effort not to fall for his distractions. While Henna was arresting Cilliers, D.S. Lewis was informing Vicky that her husband was their main suspect. She was alone with her toddler and baby, and stuck in a body brace. The news devastated her. She did not understand why the bail conditions prevented him from returning to the family home. She just wanted her husband back. Cilliers' phone turned out to be a treasure trove for the investigation. It had been less than 6 months since he'd met Goller, but the two had managed to exchange 32,000 messages during that time. This, of course, supports the infidelity, demonstrating a lack of emotional empathy, a lack of boundary recognition to be messaging so extensively, a sense of entitlement to behave in that manner. It demonstrates also either hoovering or the assertion of control for the purpose of gaining stimulation through the repeated contact with the individual. Cilliers had told her he had a heavily pregnant wife, but insisted it was another man's baby. Lie, blame-shifting, smearing. After the birth, he falsely claimed to have had a DNA test proving he was not the father of his newborn son. Again, absence of emotional empathy and callousness to suggest that his wife had been unfaithful when she had not, and also to disown his newborn son. "To be with you, I would do anything," he told Goller. "I will sacrifice and give up so much for you. Promise gain. From April onwards, I can do random and spontaneous." This is demonstrative of the fact that he was demonstrating that he'd already decided that he was going to kill his wife. But Goller wasn't the only person Cilliers was messaging. He was sleeping with his ex-wife, Carly Cilliers, mother to two of his older children. Accordingly, it is the case that Cilliers has an intimate partner primary source, his wife, an intimate partner secondary source, an affair partner, and he's returning to a former intimate partner primary source as well. Such behaviours as devaluing of his wife shows a lack of boundary recognition and, of course, a sense of entitlement to behave this way. Carly, the ex-wife, lived less than a mile away from him and Vicky in Amesbury. The two families shared childcare. He was also a member of a website called Fab Swingers, where he hooked up with partners for casual sex, as well as regularly searching for sex workers on adult work. This demonstrates a hypersexualization which is common with certain narcissists or psychopaths. It may well be the case that the necessity of having sex with so many different people was part of the receipt of fuel and the residual benefit of pleasure, or it might have been the accumulation of sex partners and the stimulation sought as part of the necessary triad. He can have a conversation with his wife about picking up the children, or a bit of shopping at the same time as arranging to meet someone he knows from Fab Swingers for some adult fun, and ringing someone from adult work to see if they are available, Franklin says. 3 totally separate conversations at the same time, managed in such a way that there was never a long phone call to the wrong person. When you see that repeated constantly for years, you see what kind of person he was. That is demonstrative of the compartmentalization and the fact that he had no conscience in behaving in such a way. Furthermore, the fact that he never made a mistake with regard to who he was talking to is demonstrative of a higher level of control, which would demonstrate a more sophisticated narcissist or psychopath. The police were able to establish that Cilliers was £22,000 in debt, but they suspect the real total was far higher. He moved money around his many accounts on a daily basis, weaving a web that was almost impossible for financial investigators to unpick. He owed money to payday lenders, lack of accountability, former work colleagues, lack of accountability, and his wife. Over their 7-year relationship, she had lent him more than £19,000, which he was supposed to pay back with a regular standing order, but often didn't. Sense of entitlement, lack of accountability. After he helped himself to £6,000 from her savings account, theft, he claimed her account had been hacked, blame-shifting. The bank investigated and traced the IP address used in the transaction to the family's home computer. Cilliers had been careful to invest in Vicky's life insurance. He had added her to his own army policy and made sure she had the maximum possible cover. He didn't know that this would be all he was in line to receive in the event of her death. Aware of his spending problems, she had cut him out of her will in late 2014, leaving everything to their 2 children. Again, demonstrative of planning on his part. Franklin and Lewis, the police officers, went to visit Vicky again. They told her only that her husband was having an affair, that he had intended to leave her for his lover, and that he had denied their son was his. I thought that would be enough for her to see that there was something seriously wrong and she needed to take a step back, trust the police and accept he couldn't come home. Franklin says, "It worked, for that evening at least. That was when she told them about the gas leak." One morning, 6 days before the parachute jump, Vicky smelled gas in her kitchen. Cilliers wasn't home. He'd left his family asleep upstairs to spend the night at his barracks. He told Vicky he'd wanted to avoid the early morning traffic, but had actually spent the evening with his ex-wife, texting his girlfriend and then contacting prostitutes. Repeated acts of infidelity. Vicky checked the gas valve in the kitchen cupboard next to the oven and saw blood on it. She messaged Cilliers, asking if he touched it. "Are you trying to bump me off?" she joked. Cilliers admonished her for suggesting it, nullification of threat to control. But forensic examination of the valve proved the valve was his, and that force had been used only to loosen the valve and not to tighten it. This was the only piece of forensic evidence police had that showed Cilliers had tried to kill his wife. It also showed he didn't care if his children were killed alongside her. This again shows a premeditated attempt to kill her and an absence of emotional empathy for his wife and his 2 children. It was more than 2 years before the case came to court. It had taken 9 months for the small police team to wade through the tens of thousands of pages of data they had extracted from Cilliers' phone. It then took another 9 months for the Crown Prosecution Service to review the investigation and decide the case was strong enough for a realistic chance of conviction. But Vicky wanted to put the events of April 2015 behind her. By the time she gave evidence at the first trial, she was no longer cooperating with the investigation. She told the court she'd exaggerated in her initial statements to the police, that Emile had been in the toilets with the parachute for only 5 minutes, not 10. "I made it sound worse than it was because I was humiliated. I wanted him to suffer," she said. There were no friends or family in court supporting Cilliers during either trial, no character witnesses to challenge the prosecution's depiction of him. This would demonstrate that either he was an individual with a small fuel matrix, or that he was a loner, someone that had no connection to people and that people were not interested in supporting. His army colleagues will not comment on him, except to say he's been discharged, in line with normal procedure when a soldier is sentenced to imprisonment. But Nicolene Shepherd knows Cilliers well. She grew up with him in South Africa, was his on-off girlfriend for 10 years, and is the mother of the oldest 2 of his 6 children. They started going out when she was 13, and he was 17, lack of boundary recognition. It was Shepherd's first sexual relationship. He was charismatic and charming, she tells me. He was good-looking. He had a lot more hair then. He had these nice green eyes. A lot of girls liked him. They grew up in Ermelo, a small town east of Johannesburg, where the church was the centre of the community and everybody knew everybody's business. Cilliers worked for his father's construction company and had plenty of disposable cash. He always had to have the latest gadgets, accumulation. When mobile phones first came out, he was the first to have them. The Cilliers she knew was used to getting whatever he wanted, pursuit of control, and was always in pursuit of his next big prize, whether that was an object or a woman. When Shepherd was 16, she gave birth to their daughter Celine in 2000. She was pregnant with their son Trevor 6 months later. Cilliers left South Africa for a working holiday in England while Shepherd was pregnant with their son. He promised he'd come back and they'd be parents together. Future faking, but instead met and married Carly and joined the army. He left it to his mother to break the news to Shepherd, then made no attempt to communicate with her or their children. Disengagement of both the former of the intimate partner primary source and his own children. Complete absence of emotional empathy, objectification. Shepherd moved to the United Kingdom in March 2004. She had no intention of making contact with Cilliers and says she only did so in 2006 when Celine, then 6, began asking questions about her father. By that time, he and Carly had 2 children of their own. When he turned up, it was all about how he only married Carly because his visa was running out and how he was in the middle of divorcing her. And then we started reminiscing about old times. He was very charming, she says sheepishly. We got back together. Thus, he hoovered her back into the relationship or used his charm to assert control over her once again. Notwithstanding the callous behaviour that he had exhibited, he was able to bring her under control again. But Cilliers wasn't in the middle of divorcing Carly. Lie, as Shepherd discovered when he went to work one day and left his phone in her conservatory, and Carly rang. When the 2 women realised they had been lied to, they decided Shepherd should go over to Carly's house so they could confront Cilliers today. If looks could kill, I would have been dead that day, Shepherd says. He asked me, in Afrikaans, "What the fuck are you doing here?" Their relationship ended the same day, but she says he kept texting her, pestering her to see him again. Sense of entitlement, assertion of control, hoovering. She met another man, got married, had 3 more children, and changed her phone number. But Cilliers still tracked her down on Facebook. He doesn't like to be told no, Shepherd explains, threat to control. He's used to having his own way, sense of entitlement. She also explains, I was a 16-year-old girl. I'd just had a C-section, and 10 days later we were sexually active again because it was what he wanted. Sense of entitlement, objectification, lack of emotional empathy. Looking back on that now, I know how disgusting and dangerous that is. Whether he didn't get it or didn't care, I don't know. That's what he wanted, so that's what he got. Vicky Cilliers was present when her husband was sentenced to life in prison for trying to kill her and for recklessly endangering their children, but asked that her victim impact statement was not read out in open court. Victim impact statements are used to help a judge decide how to sentence a perpetrator. And while the contents of Vicky's statement were not made public, it's believed that she tried to get a more lenient sentence for her husband. It's demonstrative that this woman is somebody that is suffering from emotional thinking, that is under the spell of this individual. Meanwhile, a pre-sentence report on Cilliers assessed him as posing a high risk to adults, particularly partners. In sentencing, the judge, Mr. Justice Sweeney, observed that Vicky seemed to have recovered from the physical harm, but not, having seen her in the witness box at length, from the psychological harm. In the days after that Cilliers was found guilty, Vicky gave paid interviews to 2 tabloid newspapers and appeared on Good Morning Britain to say that she did not accept the verdict. She has said nothing since then. I have to go, I suppose, with the verdict, she said at the time. It's almost like peer pressure to conform. My family, friends, everyone seems to think they know more than I do. They see different evidence to me, she said at the time. He'd been unfaithful, he'd had issues with money, but that's not attempted murder. Yes, I'm hurt and angry, but can I see him as capable of murder? No. She describes Cilliers as a passionate, intense, alpha male soldier and a sex addict. As I've explained to you many times before, sex addicts are essentially narcissists or psychopaths that utilize sex as a means to either get to the prime aims or as part of the necessary triad, seeking stimulation and accumulation with many sexual partners. I don't think it's addiction as such, she said. He just likes to get what he wants. Control, sense of entitlement. She was horrified, this is Shepherd, to discover that her first love was capable of murder, but not surprised. To you and me, it's a life. To him, it's just an object, just something in the way. That is the mindset of the psychopath. For the police, it is a bittersweet victory. They have achieved justice for a victim who doesn't really want it, in a case that seemed almost too far-fetched to be real. It's like a James Bond, but more extreme, Henna says. If Mark Bayada hadn't gathered the evidence and flagged it up, and if someone who knew her hadn't rung up to say something's not right here, he very well may have got away with it. I now turn to the sentencing remarks that were made by the judge that presided over the trial, Mr. Justice Sweeney, on the 15th of June 2018. Emile Cilliers, you are 38 years old and have no previous convictions. The fact that he has no previous convictions would show a level of sophistication. It's likely that this type of individual had engaged in criminal behaviours, for instance, the treatment of his partners previously, but had never been caught. The jury convicted you on the overwhelming evidence presented at your retrial of 3 offences. Count 1. The attempted murder at the end of March 2015 of your wife of 3.5 years, Victoria, by causing a gas leak from a valve fitting in the kitchen of the matrimonial home in Amesbury, which you intended would, in your absence thereafter, result in an explosion that would kill her. However, that attempt failed when there was no explosion. Count 2. In the process of that attempt, causing criminal damage to the fitting, being reckless as the resulting endangerment of the lives of your children, your daughter then aged 2, going on 3, and your son then just 6 weeks old. Count 3. A second attempted murder of your wife some 5 days after the first, this time on Easter Saturday, by sabotaging her hired main and reserve parachutes so that they would malfunction. In the result, when she jumped from around 3,800 feet the following day, both parachutes did malfunction and she fell to earth. However, miraculously, and albeit severely injured, she survived. These were, I am sure, offences that were planned and carried out in cold blood for the 3 motives advanced by the prosecution, namely that 1. You had major money problems which you believed, wrongly as it turned out, would be solved by your wife's death because you would receive a £120,000 payment from her life insurance. 2. It would prevent her from damaging your career, which, as one of your emails showed, was something that you were worried about. Nullification of threat to control, preservation of status. You had met and you were passionately in love with Miss Goller, to whom you had pledged your future, as evidenced in your many messages to her that were in evidence, and wanted your wife dead to enable you to have an unobstructed relationship with your new love. Removal of obstacle, nullification of threat to control. You were born and brought up in South Africa, where you left school at 18 and went into your father's construction business. You formed a relationship with a young woman and had 2 children with her, but then aged 20 left South Africa and came to this country alone. Here, in 2003, you married your first wife, Carly, with whom you also had 2 children. It was during your marriage to Carly that you joined the army. However, following a skiing accident, you ended that marriage. In 2010, when you were 30 and still recovering from your skiing injury, Victoria was assigned to be your physiotherapist. She was in her mid-30s, a former army officer, and in the throes of separation and divorce from her first husband. Vulnerable target. After she had passed responsibility for your treatment to a colleague, the 2 of you began a relationship, introducing each other to your respective sporting passions. Hers was skydiving. She was an immensely experienced and able skydiver and instructor and a member of the Army Parachute Association at Netheravon Airfield. It was there, in November 2010, that you obtained a main parachute packing certificate, gaining in the process detailed knowledge of the workings of such parachutes and the ability to earn extra money as a packer. In September 2011, you and Victoria married in South Africa. She had made it clear that she wanted children, and you had agreed. Your daughter was born in April 2012. In October 2012, you completed a reserve parachute packing course, gaining in the process detailed knowledge of their workings as well. By 2013, you had been promoted to sergeant. In October 2013, you, Victoria, and your daughter moved into a new house in Amesbury. Victoria had given her love to you without reservation. However, by 2013, and whatever your feelings had been for her in the early stages of your relationship and marriage, you were leading a double life, in which your only guiding compass was your own selfish, emotional, sexual and financial desires. You had been having casual sex with other women from at least 2013 onwards, repeated infidelity, and there were plainly many of them, accumulation. Indeed, the evidence was clear that you had become contemptuous of your wife, lack of emotional empathy. Quite apart from the other women, you got or took large amounts of her money, lack of boundary recognition, theft. You avoided repaying her by ever more complicated deceit and lies. And you took ruthless advantage of her underlying feelings for you by emotionally coercing her, exploitation. In November 2014, with your wife around 6 months pregnant with your son, you went to Austria for a month as part of the army ski team. There, you met and fell for Miss Goller. Infidelity. She was not interested in a relationship with a married man, and so you told her a pack of lies to the effect that you had separated from your wife some months before, having discovered that she had had an affair, and that the child that she was carrying was not yours. Lie. Blame-shifting. In the result, you began an affair with Miss Goller, which included spending a week with her in Berlin over New Year 2015, and a night in Austria, and a long weekend in Prague in January 2015. In messages between the two of you that month, you stated that from April onwards you could do random and spontaneous, that to be with her you would do anything, and that your marriage had been a stupid mistake which you regretted every day. False remorse, smearing, promise gain. It was also in January 2015 that you expressed concern about the potential damage that your wife could do to your career if you fell out. In February 2015, Miss Goller stayed with you at your barracks for a week, which included Valentine's Day. 6 days after Miss Goller left the barracks to go and work in Belize, your wife gave birth to your son. It is telling that while she was in the early stages of labour at home downstairs, you were upstairs exchanging loving text messages with Miss Goller, and that shortly after your son's birth, you were telling Miss Goller that she was the one that you wanted. Indeed, by then, you had talked with your mother about leaving your wife. Coldness, callousness, absence of emotional empathy. Whilst on the surface, after the birth of your son, you gave your wife some help, the picture below the surface remained very different. You were keeping the relationship with Miss Goller going, affair, with ever more passionate texts, emails and conversations between the two of you, including making plans for a holiday in Honduras that summer, and for your long-term future together. At the same time, you were having sexual relations with various other women. Thus, infidelity towards his wife and infidelity towards Miss Goller, including your former wife Carly, and you remained in very considerable financial difficulties. This shows either an individual with a necessity of the pleasure of sex as a residual benefit, or the stimulation and accumulation associated with the psychopath. In the result, you determined to kill your wife by causing a gas explosion in the kitchen of the family home, even though your children were going to be in the house at the time of the explosion as well. Absence of emotional empathy. During Sunday the 29th of March 2015, you exchanged over 318 messages with Miss Goller, told your wife that you needed to stay at the barracks that night, and arranged with your former wife Carly to have sex with her on your way to the barracks. That evening, once your wife and children were safely in bed upstairs and employing your knowledge and DIY skills, you used a pair of adjustable locking pliers and a universal wrench to open the top nut on the gas valve in the cupboard adjacent to the gas hob and electric oven. You opened the nut just far enough to cause a leak, but not so much that it would be difficult to explain away if there was no explosion. You then left to keep your assignation with Carly and thereafter travelled on to the barracks. Infidelity, planning of attempted murder. The following morning, your wife realised that there was a gas leak. She contacted you, and you effectively suggested that she turn the hob on. She was much more sensible and took appropriate precautions to avoid any risk of an explosion. In any event, it is difficult to cause gas to explode. The leak was passed off to the gas engineer who attended that evening to fix it as being the product of a vibration from nearby building works. So it was your first attempt to kill your wife by blowing her up, which also involved being reckless as to the resultant danger to your children, and this failed. But you were determined to succeed. Even before the engineer had attended to fix the gas leak, you were texting your wife asking if she wanted to skydive at the weekend. She had not jumped since becoming pregnant with your son, and flattered by some attention from you, indicated that she was interested in doing that. What she did not know was that you had seen the opportunity for a second attempt on her life. As you knew, her own rig was away being serviced, and so she would have to hire a rig from the APA. If that could be sabotaged and she then fell to her death, any malfunction could be blamed on accident, negligence of one or more packers at the APA, or sabotage by another. Premeditated planning, blame shifting. The days until what was the Easter weekend passed with you continuing to message Miss Goller, assertion of control, including flirting with her about the two of you getting engaged, future faking, promised gain, telling her that she was amazing, flattery, and the one that you wanted, and making further arrangements in relation to the holiday in Honduras, continued infidelity. In the afternoon of Saturday the 4th of April 2015, you, your wife, and both your children went to Nether Avon, where you hired a 149 rig for your wife. After you had got it, your daughter said that she wanted to go to the toilet. You seized the opportunity that provided and took her to the men's toilet, taking the rig with you. There, using your knowledge of parachutes, you sabotaged the reserve parachute by removing the slinks from the two right-hand risers and sabotaged the main parachute by pulling out the lines and passing the bag through them in the manner ultimately demonstrated by the expert Mr. Bayada. You left no external trace of what you had done, and knew that it would not be revealed by pre-flight checks. The fact that you did that, intending to kill your wife, in the presence of your young daughter, speaks volumes about the sort of person you are and the gravity of your offending. Absence of emotional empathy. However, the weather was not good enough to jump that afternoon, and so it was that rather than hand the rig back to the kit store as would be the norm, but which would carry the risk that she would be given a different rig the next day, you persuaded your wife to keep it overnight in the locker that you shared with her at the APA. On Sunday the 5th of April 2005, Victoria returned alone to Nether Avon around midday, whilst you remained at home with the children. The weather was less than ideal. However, to ensure that you succeeded in killing her, you encouraged her in messages to stay and to jump. In the meanwhile, you were exchanging loving messages with Miss Goller. Callousness, compartmentalization. Finally, in the late afternoon, the weather was good enough for Victoria to do a hop and pop jump from around 3,800 feet. She was the last to jump from the aircraft. Her main parachute malfunctioned as you had intended it would, and so, in accordance with the correct procedure, she cut it away and triggered her reserve parachute. But again, as you intended, it also malfunctioned. On the left side of the canopy, only the left side of the canopy inflated, and she began to spiral violently as she fell to earth, passing out from the G-forces. Those who saw what happened and went to where she had fallen expected to find a dead body. They even took a body bag with them. But miraculously, I repeat, and albeit very seriously injured, she survived. That was the result of the combination of the fact that the reserve parachute had slowed her descent to a limited extent, that she was light in weight, that she had landed in a recently ploughed field, and that she received expert medical help both at the scene, in the air ambulance, and thereafter at hospital. Whilst she was being operated on in hospital, you were involved in the exchange of numerous messages with Miss Goller, telling her ever more complex lies to her to keep the relationship going. Callousness, assertion of control, absence of emotional empathy. Expert examination of the parachutes led to the conclusion that sabotage may have been the cause of the malfunctions, and a police investigation began. Victoria was released from hospital on the 22nd of April 2015. You were arrested and interviewed on the 28th of April 2015 and in September 2015. In those interviews, you falsely denied committing any crime. Denial, nullification of threat to control. In the April interviews, you said that your marriage was over. In the September interviews, you said that you had had a change of heart. I have no doubt that that change was a tactical move rather than genuine manipulation. At all events, the meticulous police investigation revealed the truth of what you had done, and so, in September 2016, you were charged. At the retrial, the jury saw through your lying denials and convicted you. In passing sentence upon you, the first question that I must consider is whether you are a dangerous offender, i.e., whether there is a significant risk to members of the public of serious harm occasioned by the commission by you of further specified offences. In answering that question, I have taken into account all the information before me, including the content of the pre-sentence report and all the matters advanced on your behalf, including your lack of previous convictions, albeit that is tempered by aspects of your admitted behaviour. The fact that you have been out of trouble for the last 3 years, have done good works and reduced your debts, together with the character references put forward on your behalf. Notwithstanding the criticisms that have been made in writing on your behalf about the pre-sentence report, it is not suggested that there was no basis for the author to conclude that you are dangerous. Having presided over both your trials, I agree with the author of the report that, not having the courage to face the end of your relationship with your wife head on, you made the decision to murder her and became single-minded in your attempts to create opportunities to carry out your plan. That your offending involved a high level of planning and premeditation where various possibilities were considered. That you showed a reckless disregard for the safety and welfare of your children in the pursuit of your objective, and that it was the fact that you were able to switch off your emotions that enabled you twice to construct and carry out plans to murder your wife in order to put an end to the self-inflicted chaos that you had created in your life. I have no doubt, as the author of the report touches on, that you are reckless and single-minded, with significant deficits in thinking and behaviour, and that you enjoy taking risks no matter what the cost. You are an expert in manipulation. You are plainly capable of planning someone's murder simply to meet your own selfish needs, and you demonstrated an ability to orchestrate a complex plan which required an unprecedented level of calm under significant pressure. I also agree that the alarming level of self-belief and single-mindedness that you demonstrated are a cause for significant concern. I also agree with the prosecution that you have shown yourself to be a person of quite exceptional callousness who will stop at nothing to gratify his own desires, material or otherwise. Nor have you shown the slightest sign of remorse. In the result, and notwithstanding the absence of previous convictions and your behaviour since, I am sure that someone who is prepared to do what you did for their own selfish purposes and has the other character and thinking traits to which I have referred presents a significant, indeed, in my view, high risk of serious harm by the commission of further specified offences, not only to partners and children, but also to members of the wider public with whom, absent custody, he is likely to come into contact as well. Accordingly, in my view, you are a dangerous offender. The next question that I must consider is whether the overall seriousness of the offending is such as to justify the imposition of a sentence of imprisonment for life. In answering that question, I have considered all the circumstances of the offending and all the information about you before me, including the submissions made on your behalf, together with the level of danger that you pose, whether there is a reliable estimate at the time when you will cease to be a danger, and the alternative available sentences. In my view, your offending was extremely serious. There were 2 attempts to murder your wife. They were planned and carried out in cold blood for your own selfish purposes, which included financial gain. They both involved abuse of trust. The first also involved being reckless as to endangering the lives of your children. It is miraculous that the second did not result in your wife's death, but you intended her to suffer a dreadful death, and she did suffer very serious injury. As I have said, you pose a high risk of danger, and in my view, it is not possible to reliably estimate when you will cease to be a danger. The alternative sentences are a determinate sentence or an extended sentence. The former is not appropriate given that you are a dangerous offender and the level of danger that you pose. The latter is not appropriate, in my view, because it is not possible to reliably estimate when you will cease to be a danger. In the result, I have concluded that a life sentence is justified. I must next consider the length of the minimum term that you must serve before the parole board can begin to consider whether it is safe for you to be released. That involves consideration of the determinate sentence that I would have passed had that been an appropriate course. Whilst I disagree with the prosecution that, if successful, the first attempt would have been murder by the use of an explosive, as opposed to a gas explosion, it is not disputed that if either attempt had been successful, it would have been murder done for gain, would have involved a starting point for the minimum term of 30 years, the equivalent of a determinate term of 60 years, and that thus both attempts are Category 1 offences, as defined in the guideline in relation to attempted murder. In my view, the best way to determine the length of the determinate sentence that I would have passed is to reflect your overall criminality in the sentence on count 3, and to impose concurrent sentences on the other offences. I must first determine the starting point. There was clearly very high culpability because the offence was premeditated and carefully planned and carried out in cold blood, partly in the presence of your daughter. There was clearly much more than some harm as a result. that your wife survived at all was miraculous. She undoubtedly suffered severe physical harm and must, I am sure, have suffered psychological harm, both in the terror of the fall and since. She appears, however, to have recovered from her physical injuries, but not in my view, having seen her in the witness box at great length, from the psychological harm. Taking all those matters into account, the starting point that I take is one of 28 years. I must then balance the additional aggravating features and the mitigating features. The additional aggravating features are very serious, namely that there was a previous attempt, also planned and carried out in cold blood for gain, though not involving any physical harm. That attempt additionally involved the presence of and reckless endangerment of the lives of your very young children, and that both attempts involved the abuse of a position of trust. The mitigating features advanced are that your ultimately successful career in the army has been lost. You attended your trial when you could have taken flight, your endeavours to pursue association with your children, that you have no other family in this country, which, together with the fact that your limited opportunity to participate in sport during your time in custody, add to your burdens. Your behaviour over the last 3 years, as attested to in the 3 character references before me, and including good works and the reduction of your debt and the support that will be available to you on release. In my view, the additional aggravating features very significantly outweigh the mitigating features, such that even giving full effect to the principle of totality, the ultimate determinate sentence would have been one of 36 years. I must then halve that, which gives us a minimum of 18 years. Stand up, please, Mr. Cilliers. This was wicked offending of extreme gravity. On counts 1 and 3, your sentence is one of life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 18 years. On count 2, your sentence is one of 14 years imprisonment. All the sentences will run concurrently. Thus, those are the sentencing remarks of Mr. Justice Sweeney, which provides us with added insight into this individual. It is clear that Cilliers has no emotional empathy, that he is manipulative, that he has a sense of entitlement, that he shows no accountability, that he sees people as objects. It's evident that he could be a narcissist, that he could be a psychopath. To my mind, the appropriate finding is that he is a psychopath. The reason for this is that he needs control as part of the necessary triad. It shows that his repeated activities with sexual partners was stimulation, and that the number of sexual partners that he sought and his preoccupation with money was a matter of accumulation. It could also be said that he'd be a narcissist by virtue of the need for control and the various nullifications of threat to control. That it might be the case that he was seeking fuel from all the various sexual partners that he sought. That he would be seeking character traits from those people, and there was the residual benefits associated with the financial gain from the murder and also pleasure from all of the sex that he was having. However, from the material it strikes me that he was not an individual that was in the pursuit of fuel. He was more of a loner. And whilst of course he had numerous sexual relationships, it was more the case that he was disconnected from those individuals. Furthermore, it was evident that the callousness that he exhibited and the single-minded determination that he exhibited in order to pursue the relationship with Goller and be rid of his wife, who was seen as an obstacle, was commensurate more with the behaviour of a psychopath. Furthermore, as the judge stated in his own sentencing remarks, the fact that he exhibited considerable calmness in circumstances of being under considerable pressure is also demonstrative of an absence of anxiety and a fearlessness, something which was also evidenced when he was first interviewed by the police. Accordingly, the determination in relation to Emile Cilliers is that he is a pure psychopath. He will, of course, have strong narcissistic traits, but that he is a psychopath that pursues the necessary triad of controlling people, of seeking stimulation and accumulation. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.